everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Weeb from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny Winnipeg Jets pre-free agency show, where we're going to kind of take a look at the needs of the Winnipeg Jets, the wants of the Winnipeg Jets, what we think makes sense for those needs and wants, and kind of just talk about where the team is at after the draft. Speaking of after the draft, Mark Hillier, the head amateur scout of the Winnipeg Jets, is going to join us at around 40 minutes after the hour. Before that, Elliot Friedman, our good friend at Sportsnet, is going to come join us to give us an idea. The premier insider in the game is going to give us an idea of what he's hearing, what the market is seeing, and maybe a little bit of insight on what he thinks the Winnipeg Jets are going to go after. But before that, let's get at bringing in a little bit of analysis for both myself and Ken Weeb. Best way to do that is to bring Ken in the show, and you know what that means. It's the best entry music in the business. Here comes Kenny. Kenny, my friend, great to see you made it back from Montreal. We had a heck of a time there, and your time just lasted a little bit longer. It's like you didn't want to come home. But now that you're home, how was the last day in Montreal, and how are you feeling?
Yeah, excellent, Sean. Good to be seeing you again. We've had a fun stretch for sure. I think the 5th load of laundry is done so far, so trying to be productive here after we've returned from a great week in Montreal. I had a fun little Saturday touring around the city. I went into full tourist mode. I got just under 40,000 steps in exploring the city, and got out on a little tour of the St. Lawrence on a boat for about 45 minutes, and then spent part of yesterday on the train and on the way to Ottawa. Spent some time with some friends, and got on the bird last night and made it home. So great to be back, but lots of fun. We had lots of buzz around Montreal with the draft itself and about what could be happening around the horizon, and just filed my free agency template column for sportsnet.ca this afternoon. I put the link up in the chat for the good folks in the chat room, and we're ready to roll. It's exciting time of the year. Sending a few messages around with folks, and it's going to be interesting. It's an interesting decision time for a lot of people, whether that's Jets, former Jets, or perhaps future Jets, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, no doubt. The one thing that I think is pretty important before this, and I got to say, I was a little surprised there weren't more trades at the draft. I know talking with a couple of GMs, they were surprised as well. I know I spoke with one of those GMs, and he told me that he fully expected now in the days leading up to free agency that we'd see a lot more trades. Now, I don't want to say, maybe things will pick up right before it picks up, but I think it's been quieter than most people expected it to be. And I think if you're looking through a Winnipeg Jets lens and a Winnipeg Jets perspective, this idea of the potential trade of Captain Blake Wheeler is one of the things that I think is, if the Jets are going to do this, to me, this really is a domino that has got to fall. Is it not, Ken? If they're going to do this, is it important that they do it before free agency? Give me your take.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sean. This is what I would say. A lot of people, whether it's friends or colleagues, have been asking the same kind of question. We fielded a lot of questions about Blake Wheeler during the last couple of days in Montreal. What I would say is this, Sean. I think that we were expecting a little bit more action. But what I think has happened is I think that those days were spent sort of laying the groundwork for any of that future action. I think there's a bunch of teams that have some incredibly big decisions to make on the free agency side of things. I think of the Calgary Flames here and the talks with Johnny Gaudreau needing a new contract for Matthew Tkachuk. There's a bunch of teams that have sort of similar issues in terms of what they have on their plate. And also, too, a team like the Jets hadn't had 7 draft picks for quite some time. I think 2017 maybe was the last time. So they definitely had that on the front burner. But I expect, and what I'd said to a bunch of people also, Sean, like now we're entering the wheelhouse of what happened last year, the 24-hour period where the Jets added Nate Schmidt and Brendan Dillon. It came in the days leading into free agency. So I know some years in the past there's more action at the draft, but it feels like this year things have kind of just been moving towards that. I mean, in my column, the Jets do have roughly $18 million to spend, but that's only including 13 players under contract. So
Right.
that's not a lot. It seems like a big chunk of change, but then you have to remember Pierre-Luc Dubois is probably looking at eating up at least $7 million of that change. And there's a lot of people they're going to have to fill out in terms of the roster. One thing we should get into, or we'll get into shortly, about the restricted free agents and the lack of a qualifying offer for Marcus Phillips and obviously for Yevgeny Svechnikov. But just to put a bow on the Wheeler situation, we got to remember this is a complex type of deal to make. I mean, would it be beneficial for the Jets to know if they're making that move going into free agency? Of course it would, but Blake holds the majority of the control in this situation. I mean, he will have a 5-team list that he would submit for acceptance. Now, would he be open to something else outside of those 5 teams if it appeals to him? Of course, but it's not a trade that you just call up, dial up and say, here we go, it's on a platter for you. And the complicating part of the matter, Sean, from talking to people around Montreal, it's how much retention, if any, will there be? I mean, how many contenders can afford the full 8.25? Not a ton, right? I mean, Blake Wheeler's not likely to be going to a team that's trying to get to the floor. He's likely to go to a team that is going towards the ceiling. So there aren't a ton of those teams out there right now, but all it takes is one phone call for those types of conversations to heat up. Let's go to this right away. Tracy Evans Buer, has Wheeler asked for a trade, or is this club driven? Our understanding is this is more of a mutual thing than a one side saying it's time to go or it's time to move me. But we've talked about this a lot. I mean, there hasn't been as much joy around Blake Wheeler in terms of his play has still been at a high level, but I don't think he's been enjoying the game quite as much the last couple of years during the pandemic. And I think we'll see what happens. I mean, I've said this before. I don't think they've reached the point of no return, but usually when you get to this situation where both sides think a change might be better for both parties, there's usually a move towards making something happen, right, Sean? I mean, don't you agree?
I agree. I just think the difference here is that you summed it up off the top, like trying to make something fit here. I don't think that's easy. So, I mean, I'm of the school, I'll believe it when I see it. You know what I mean? And I felt similar to Mark Scheifele, and I think there's a lot of people who thought at the end of the year that Mark Scheifele was going to be gone. It was just a matter of time, and I'm on record. You can go back and look at these podcasts. I never thought for a second that Mark Scheifele was moving. Now, I think some of that has to do with him wanting to stick around, how the team feels about this situation. But, I also think there's a little bit of when you're dealing with Kevin Cheveldayoff, you are dealing with a GM who is not going to make a move unless he feels he's getting back exactly what he wants to get back. This is not a GM that goes out and says, you know what, I got to take it on the chin this time. He doesn't do that. We can go back and look at this time and time again. He does not do that. So for me, there's a couple of things that are at play here. Yes, okay, maybe there's mutual interest in moving on, but Blake Wheeler is going to want to go to a situation that he wants to go to. You just talked about it. That's not going to be easy. The Colorado Avalanche aren't adding Blake Wheeler. As much as people want to talk about it, I don't think for a second that the Florida Panthers are adding Blake Wheeler. The Toronto Maple Leafs aren't adding Blake Wheeler. So if you take a look at all of these teams that, are the teams that you're thinking, oh, okay, the next team to win the cup, and if that's what is driving Blake Wheeler, it's not easy to make that move work. The teams that he most likely fits on without the Jets having to take it on the chin financially is a team like the Arizona Coyotes who can, take on that salary, or maybe the Chicago Blackhawks the way they're trending. I don't know why they would want to do that, the way that they seem to be, getting rid of every single NHL eligible player the way that they're doing. But those are the places where you could see things fitting. Does Blake want to go there? So when you've got two sides that are thinking, okay, maybe it's best to move on, but one side that says, yeah, we'll move on if we get back what we want, and I feel like I'm not taking it on the chin. And the other side says, well, I'll move on if I go somewhere and get into a situation that I like. I think it just makes it harder and harder for this move to get done. And I think that there's two things that drive this, and I've said this before. Kevin Cheveldayoff, Mark Chipman, they want what they put together to work. I think that they would feel so vindicated. They would feel so vindicated if the Jets, came back with a similar roster this year and did really well. And then it would be like, you know what? We only had one thing wrong, and that was that we didn't have the right coaching staff in place. They could turn around and say that at the end of the year if this works. And then two, just the fact that they have a new coach in Rick Bowness, who's a little bit of a soothsayer when it comes to bad dressing rooms. We know that. We know how he knows how to deal with disgruntled players. We know that he knows how to instill a team defense with the Jets. I think there's a feeling here that, like, look, if we can't move Blake, well, then let's see what Rick Bowness can do with him. They've already decided to go that way with Mark Scheifele. And so I think it's an interesting situation because I think if this was going to get done, it should be done before the draft. But I think in order to get this deal done, the Jets are going to have to retain salary, which I don't think Kevin Cheveldayoff wants to do. And I think if they're going to get it done, Blake Wheeler's going to have to go to a place that is not ideal and probably not on the list of teams that he was interested in going to. So if it comes down to an idea of both sides moving on from him and both sides having a bad taste in their mouth because of it, I could see them saying, let's see if we can't take that bad taste, which I think we know is part of the issues that we've seen in the dressing room, and see if Rick Bowness can smooth that over. That's my take.
Yeah, quick one. Your mic is cracking quite a bit.
Yeah,
I'm just going to
plug it.
Keep it sorted. Yeah, I mean, so Turd Ferguson mentions the Ducks. I mean, I was sort of sniffing around wondering, I was talking with Eric Stevens about maybe a potential fit there. He wasn't 100% sure. I mean, is it possible with having a guy like Ryan Getzlaf coming off the books that they might look at someone like Blake Wheeler? Maybe. I don't know that that's a perfect fit, but it depends on what they do with John Gibson also, I would say, in terms of maybe we'll have a better idea what direction the Ducks are going after that. But yeah, I think it'll be very interesting. I mean, it's hard to get a real sense of what the market for Blake Wheeler is. What we know is that Blake is still a productive player. He still had a 60-point, almost a point per game rate last year. So it's just you got to be using him in the proper role. And if that happens, then we'll sort of see how it goes. But I would imagine that, that if the Jets want to take a big swing, Sean, even if they want to take a medium-sized swing in free agency, I would imagine they're going to have to move someone like Blake Wheeler. And as we've also mentioned, there's still been no movement in terms of cleaning up the logjam on the defense corps. So we'll see what happens there. I know that Brendan Dillon's name has been out there a lot, but I would say this, and I've said this before, it's easy to say that, the Jets, it's the easier contract to move. I still stand by this. The Jets need more players and people like Brendan Dillon. I don't think that moving out Brendan Dillon improves the defense corps. I think it makes it worse, to be quite frank. So I would be quite reluctant to move Brendan Dillon if I were Kevin Cheveldayoff, and he's certainly not going to give him away. But again, I think that he's a nice complementary piece on the back end. Again, that's to say nothing about the other guys. I also would say on the same token, the Jets need to make room for Dylan Sandberg and Ville Heinola. So we know Josh Morrissey's not on the move, so that means you got to either move Nate Schmidt on the left side or you got to try to find a way to move Dylan DeMello. So, and there too, the right side is not, overly deep on that front. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. I do think that we're going to see some movement here coming up in the next couple of days, and Is that in the immediate aftermath? We'll see. But I agree with you. I think that what have we talked about throughout the entire Stanley Cup final? Joe Sakic's ability to be patient and make the moves at his own timetable was part of the reason they're sipping out of the Stanley Cup and celebrating for the entire summer. And we should just quickly mention that the big news out of Colorado today, Joe Sakic moving into the president of hockey operations role, and Chris McFarland, the longtime assistant GM, promoted to general manager. So, stick taps to Chris. This is a guy who worked really hard to get to that level. And, having seen Joe Sakic around the rink at the Bell Center, he looked like a guy who is quite happy for that next challenge and excited about, continuing to work in hockey ops, but seeing a guy like Chris McFarland, whose opinion he values highly, get the promotion there as well.
I wanted to touch on, if I can for just a second here, I wanted to touch on Dylan. But before we do that, I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors, the Johnston Group, who are along for the ride with us here. You won't find two businesses with the same challenges, but you will find 30,000 businesses with Chambers Plan employee benefits proudly administered by our friends at Johnston Group. Chambers Plan is Canada's #1 plan for employee benefits because it evolves with the way you work and live. The plan is run as a not-for-profit designed specifically to support small businesses, and its unique pooling strategy keeps rates stable so you won't have any surprises at your next renewal. Chambers Plan now comes with professional consulting on key financial, legal, and HR issues, and teledoc telemedicine services are included with every health option. See how Chambers Plan can benefit your business by visiting chamberplan.ca. And I got to say, if you're going to be in business with the Johnston Group, you're in business with great people. So give them a call if that's what you're looking for. I wanted to talk on Brennan Dillon. There's been a couple comments here. I know there's a certain amount of people. I know Jeff Kabilis is saying, agrees with you, don't move on from Dillon. I know that someone had made the comment. Yeah, here we go. Nick Linham says, Sandberg makes Dillon obsolete. There's no DeMello replacement in comparison. I know what he's saying here. He's talking about, the size and the grit and all those kind of things. I will say, I don't think Sandberg's in a place where his game is as edgy as Dillon. And one of the things that Ken is talking about is how he is in the room. Not saying that Dylan Sandberg isn't good in the room, but Brennan Dillon is a really, really good room guy. I would say, Ken, from what I've heard, there's information out there that suggests that last year when the Jets were looking at how they were going to handle the trade deadline, I think Dillon was a player that may have put his hand up and said, listen, if you need to move someone, I'm willing to go. This isn't a problem. Could be one of these situations where, once that's happened, a guy may have already kind of set his course on going out of town. If you need to make moves and one guy has already expressed interest in moving, I think that's one of the reasons we keep seeing that name come into the situation here. I just wanted to touch on that. I will say,
just a quick counter for Nick. I mean, I would say if you move Lynham or if you move Ville Heinola to the right side, that's your. I mean, that you have a higher end version. I mean, he's not as defensively sound as DeMello. I understand that, but I think I see a place that has room for all three of those people. But someone else would have to move then for sure.
No doubt, I see it happening. I just when you have to move someone, and to your point, the Jets have to find a way to open up some space. Once that's gone in that direction, I think it can be a little bit hard to turn around. The other thing I just wanted to touch on this. I mean, I think this is, if you're moving Blake Wheeler, and it's easy for me to say I'm not a GM. I don't bear the cost of if you don't get back what you should be getting back, but we're going to get into this here, the kind of list of who we think the Jets could be going after. And I've got kind of like, them broken up into, I think they have certain needs. And I think the bottom six for me is something that has to be fixed. So I've got some names that I think would fit just great into those spots. I've got some big swing targets. And that's the thing, Ken, is you've got these big swing targets that I think could really, really work here. But I don't know that you can go after those unless you know what your financial situation is. And I don't think you know what your financial situation is until Blake Wheeler is either staying or going. So I think it's a move. If it's a move that's going to be done, it's got to get done. And I think it's one of the reasons why GMs were expecting trades setting up here, because I think they're looking at certain situations and they're looking, this GM is going to have to act on this or it's going to put him in a bad spot. Some GMs say, fine, I'll go in a bad spot and I'll figure it out from there. But I think GMs are looking around. I think that's one of the teams that they're looking at. They're saying Winnipeg's in a spot where to do this as best as they could, the best case scenario, if they're going to move on from Blake Wheeler, they should do it before free agency so they know how to handle free agency. I'm not saying it's going to happen because Kevin Cheveldayoff is patient beyond patient. I'm saying it's the best case scenario, and the Jets put themselves in a lot better spot if they are going to do that to get it done before free agency.
I'm sorry, just a quick one here for Rob Somerville. Why is it the consensus that Dillon's a player on D that is easiest to move? Well, it is because he has a smaller cap hit, and a lot of those contenders can afford a cheaper cap hit than the one that Nate Schmidt carries. And Nate Schmidt also has a third year in his deal that makes it a little bit tougher for some teams to swallow, I believe. So that's part of the reason why his name has been out there a little bit more. Sean, before we get into that list, I just want to tackle the Evgeny Svechnikov lack of a qualifying offer and becoming an unrestricted free agent. I just received some information from outside the organization that the door is not fully closed for Svechnikov to return. The belief right now is that I think, We know that Svechnikov had a very solid stretch with Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois, but he was also bouncing around the lineup and dealt with some inconsistency issues. And especially after his injury, he just never got back to playing the way that he did previously. I don't think this is a matter that the Jets have not closed the door. I don't think that Svechnikov's camp has closed the door either. But I think now they're in a situation where they're close to the market, and if there was not a full commitment being made in terms of what role he was going to be used at, I think the player is maybe going to sniff around a little bit to see if he can find a better situation for himself in terms of that ice time portion. And if he can't find that, I think you might see Svechnikov and the Jets maybe circle back later on. So as I mentioned, the door is not closed, I don't think, by either side right now. It just is something where I don't think, I think the arbitration piece, it's similar, as someone mentioned it earlier, Joe Morrow, it's a similar situation for Joe Morrow a couple years ago. We were all kind of confused thinking, he has arb rights, but he didn't have really great numbers. But I think the Jets are looking at a finite amount of money that they can spend if they want to get some things accomplished. So maybe you could see them coming back, at a number that would have been close to what the qualifying offer would have been. I mean, 2 years at $1 million, or 2 times, 2-year total value of $2 million, somewhere in that. I wouldn't rule it out, but it's also possible that the Jets are looking for a more physical, like we've often talked about the style of player the Jets have, right? So he would fall into that category as maybe being similar to what they have, and maybe they're looking for someone with a little bit more of a defensive tilt. And the one other thing I want to mention quickly too, before I let you weigh in on Svechnikov, Jansen Harkins, I think he'd be a guy that could flourish under Rick Bowness. We know that there had been some, he sort of has struggled to find his foothold with the Jets, had a couple strong games when he played up in the lineup, but then it didn't work out quite as well for him. I think that we found that he changed representation. He's now represented by Kurt Overhart, and I think that Jansen Harkins would be a guy who his kind of strong forechecking game and speed game and ability to shoot the puck, he could be a guy that really benefits from the coaching change here as we move into the offseason.
No doubt. Before I do move on, because Ken, we are running out of time before Elliot comes here, we're going to have to talk about kind of the idea of we think the Jets could go in here, and we can touch on it after we speak with Mark Hillier as well. But just wanted to give a shout out to Cambrian Credit Union, our other sponsor, and just the great work that they do in the community. You see before you a list of the sponsorships that they have put out in their time in this community, and the donations that they are putting out as well. Really, really involved in the community, and just I want to give a shout out to one of their products that my kids and my wife and I take advantage of, the Unfee accounts. One of the things that we love about Cambrian is banking for free with Unfee. Save $222 per year. Simply set up a recurring direct deposit every month to your Cambrian checking or savings account, and you qualify. No minimum balance required. Thank you to our sponsors at Cambrian Credit Union. Ken, let's get into it. Your needs as you see it for the Jets, as much as we can tell before they potentially make moves heading into it, but your need or their needs as you see them and how you see them filling them.
Yeah, for sure. Their biggest need is up front. I mean, whether it's it's secondary scoring for sure, but I think they could add a primary scorer, Sean. I think the one we saw while covering the Stanley Cup final, 2 guys that would be absolutely perfect. I would put them in the big swing category. For me, the 2 big swings would be Andre Palat and Valeri Nichushkin. I mean, these are 2 guys that play on both sides of the puck. Palat, we've seen, it's just exceptional. The whole theory of a clutch player, I mean, I'm sorry, for the folks that don't believe in it on the analytical side, forget it. I mean, 12 of his 48 playoff goals are game-winning goals. I mean, you can't argue that that's not a clutch player. And in terms of Nichushkin, we saw him up close and personal. I saw him for the last 2 rounds live and on site. This guy's just taken his game to a completely other level. And it's not that he's just an offensive player. He's a big guy, wins board battles. He's an exceptional penalty killer. He skates well for a big man. And yes, I understand that it's most likely he signs with the Colorado Avalanche and doesn't get to free agency. And same for Palat. But if those 2 guys hit the market, absolutely, those have got to be the first calls Kevin Cheveldayoff is making to unrestricted free agents. Those are 2 guys that would be perfect. You talk about if a team wants to get back to being a winner, bring in guys who have won. These guys are both winners. They've played at an exceptionally high level. And for folks that are worried that there was a connection to Dallas, Rick Bowness was the assistant when Nichushkin had his tough year with the no goals and no penalty minutes. I bet you that Rick Bowness was probably the guy that said the most positive things in the ear to Valerie Nichushkin when he went through that tough year. This guy's playing at an incredibly high level. And I agree, Waiters. I think Tampa will keep Palat, but they also need new deals for several other high-priced RFAs. So it's going to be a challenge for Julien Brisebois. And we know he's done a great job of keeping his guys, but those are the two big swings that I would be looking at.
So I agree with you. They've got what they need that's not true. Yeah, I've been saying this for years. I think the Jets need that true 1A defenseman. You're not getting that at free agency here. You're not getting it without making a crazy trade, and even making a crazy trade, I don't think that's possible to pull off. So, but from what the Jets do have as far as needs are concerned, they need to free up space and find some space for their younger guys. So it's bringing in on the back end doesn't make any sense. And I agree with you. I mean, if Wheeler stays, I don't necessarily think that the Jets need a ton more when it comes to offense. But if he goes, I think they definitely need to big swing. I don't have Andre Palat on my list, not because I don't think he'd be phenomenal. It's just not happening, Ken.
Right.
I mean, it's thrown in there. That's a wish list. That's like me asking my dad for a car. Well, when I was 10 years old for Christmas, I don't think it's happening. Valerie Nichushkin, I think, is a possibility. Valerie Nichushkin fascinates me for a couple of reasons. One, I do think Nichushkin is a player that needs to play with really good players. Like if you talk about, the old way that Paul Maurice used to talk about, I don't think he is. I think he can drive play, but I don't think he's that guy who can drive. Like he's not going to be the best guy on your team and lead you to the promised land. That's not him. But if you put him with really good players, I think it's unbelievable what we've seen him do. And I think it would be really interesting if you were to pick up a guy like that. You're going to have to pay him a lot, but he would look phenomenal on a line with Scheifele. If Rick Bowness is able to get Scheifele turned around and back playing the way that we saw him playing around 2018, imagine Scheifele playing off of that big body, like you said, like Nichushkin just destroyed the Tampa Bay Lightning with his forecheck. And not only that, he went to the hard areas to get those goals. This is exactly what the Jets have been missing for a long time. This is the exact player that they need. And I think that what you would have then is, for as long as you're going to have Pierre-Luc Dubois, as long as Nichushkin was here and playing alongside a guy like Mark Scheifele, and then you've got the second line working, then you've got that big-bodied, hard-to-play against element on your two top lines, which are still going to be very offensively productive. All of a sudden, you become everything that you want to be, everything that Kevin Cheveldayoff is saying he wants this team to be, everything Rick Bowness says he's going to coach this team to be: big, strong, in your face, get the puck back faster so you can get on offense more often. You're going to have your hands full with Nichushkin on one line. You're going to have your hands full with Pierre-Luc Dubois on the second line. And then we can get into what we do with the third and fourth. I think Nichushkin is going to be very, very sought after, so he'd be hard to get. The other guy I'd throw on this list from the same team is Andre Burakovsky. Andre Burakovsky is a longtime childhood friend of Nick Ehlers. I've been an admirer of his as a player. I don't think he quite brings the same element as Nichushkin, but if you are looking for scoring and a guy who's done it before, both scoring but also done it at the championship level, won a cup last year with the Colorado Avalanche, won a cup with the Washington Capitals, those are my two big swing candidates. And then I'd say maybe these guys could be classified as big swing. You'd kind of have to, they'd be a little bit different, but getting Dylan Strome out of Chicago, if they allow him to go, I'd be very interested to see what he looks like on a team that is not like a hot mess. You know what I mean? He spent all his time. I don't think he was properly brought up through the Arizona Coyotes. We know Chicago is a tire fire. To get him into a more stable situation would be interesting to see what he looks like. And I know you'll like this one, Ken, but Mason Marchman. What if you could get Mason Marchman? Holy smokes, that is a guy who can play up and down your scoring lineup. And I think would be able to play off of a lot of different really good Winnipeg Jet offensive players. You could play him with PLD. You could play him with Ehlers. You could play him with Scheifele. You could play him with Kyle Connor. This is a guy, I mean, geez, he was the best player on the ice in the first game the Jets played against the Florida Panthers last year, and there were a lot of good players on the ice there. He'd be phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. And another couple guys, sorry, that I mentioned in the story, I like Frank Petrano maybe as a sort of a sleeper. I mean, this guy is an absolute sniper. Averaged, I think, 19 goals over a 3 year span, including having 24 with the Florida Panthers and 18-19. Just enjoyed some great success with the Rangers. I mentioned Evan Rodriguez from the Pittsburgh Penguins. I know he had a bit of a dry spell late in the year, but I like his game. Ilya Mikheyev is a guy I think would be a really nice two-way fit as well. And then Vincent Trocheck is another guy who I mentioned as a really good possibility in the free agency market. I mean, I think Ryan Strome would be on the wish list. I just don't think that the Jets are going to be in his tax bracket. But I think those are a couple of other guys that really kind of catch my attention here. And I mentioned a couple other trade targets, and I know you mentioned Marchman and the Florida Panthers. Maybe if Ben Sherratt could be a guy who sticks around the Florida Panthers. I know we were talking about this with Eric Engels on the weekend. If the connection with Ben Sherratt and Paul Maurice maybe leads the Panthers to an extend an offer to keep him around, maybe Mackenzie Weegar becomes a guy who becomes available on the trade market. Maybe the Jets have a kind of a bigger picture deal that could include Mason Marchman and Weegar, but there would have to be a lot going back the other direction as well. But I like both of those, or I like a lot of those guys. And Rob Mahoney, I do mention Jesse Puljujärvi in my list of potential trade targets for the Winnipeg Jets. And I kind of wonder, I think the buzz around Montreal is that the concern for Ken Holland is about what you get back in a deal for Puljujärvi. And I wonder if the fact that Christian Vesalainen has been qualified but is heading back to Europe to play, I wonder if some kind of a deal involving Vesalainen and some other piece could make a Puljujärvi deal work. But I'm sure the Oilers are also looking. That would be a way for the Oilers to maybe go into a situation where they could offer a little bit more to Evander Kane. So right now it sounds like it was 4 by 4.5 according to some of the reports that were out there this afternoon. But we'll see. I mean, I understand Puljujärvi is a bit of a player that gets people going on either side of the fence.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously his underlying numbers are very good, but his offensive actual raw production has sort of struggled at times. But I mean, he's also a guy that we talk about Nichushkin, Sean. I mean, this is a guy who has Nichushkin-like qualities, and if you could ever unlock some of that potential, I just don't think that Puljujärvi's hockey sense is quite at the same level as a guy like Nichushkin, and he does not really have that penalty-killing aspect of the deal. So for me, maybe that's the big difference between those two players, but would he be worth taking a flyer on if the price was right? Absolutely, that would be a call that I would expect Kevin Cheveldayoff to have made, because we know they liked him in the 2016 draft before Laine kind of shot out of a cannon and moved to the top of their board.
Yeah, I think, from the conversations I've had, I think he'd potentially be available. I don't think that they're as in love with him. I think the school of people who think that he's like this analytics darling that no one seems to be able to figure out and suggest that the Edmonton Oilers have something on their hands that they just don't understand. I think the Oilers think that that's a ridiculous thought process. But I don't think they're giving the guy away anyway. And I don't know about you. I don't see Christian Vesalainen as being much of a sweetener for that.
No. I just meant as just you got two underachieving guys, and there would have to be something else going back from the Jets.
I know Scotty is saying that I stole his list here, so I should probably add some more, or maybe I can have a little bit of a different. I want to kind of touch on the bottom six, and where the Jets need to go on this. So, like, one on the list is Paul Stastny. Bring back Paul Stastny. He's been phenomenal. I think he's going to go have a look around. I wouldn't give up on the relationship there, but I would think that he's shown his worth, and he's one of those guys that other teams maybe looking around for. I think the difference here is for a lot of other teams, I think the feeling for other teams may be like, look, you're that elder statesman who's in a place where it's like, if we're the Colorado Avalanche, sure, come on over here and let's, you can sign up and be that guy that helps us win, but we're not going to pay you a lot of money to do it. I don't think that's where Paul Stastny's head is at. I think Paul Stastny is still in a place where he thinks he's showing value, and he wants the balance. He wants to be paid how he feels he deserves to be paid, but he also wants a chance at winning. So there's going to be certain teams that go for that. Maybe the Winnipeg Jets still fit that mold. Other than that, if we're starting to get into the bottom six, okay, here's two moves I absolutely love. One, and I think you're going to love this one, Ken, because we've covered him. He was coached by Rick Bowness in Dallas. He looked phenomenal there on the playoff run that we covered. He looked phenomenal on the playoff run that they had. And then last year, I thought when he came rolling into town with the Vegas Golden Knights, when they were just absolutely beat up, I thought he was their best player on the ice. Matthias Janmark is a guy that I would love to have in a bottom six role. This guy competes at all times. His coaches put him out in the most dire of game situations. He doesn't get you the most points. I think the most you could ask for him is about 30 to 35 points. 35 points would be the high end in an 82 game schedule. But if you want to be a team that's harder to play against, this guy is like just add him into the lineup and things get crazy. Another one that I think would be interesting that you could really potentially get at a bargain is Darren Helm. I mean, if you were able to snag Darren Helm, hometown boy, I don't know what he's looking for, but he had $1 million last year. I don't think it's going to be a lot more. Maybe he's going to stick around a place like Colorado. But that to me is one of those moves that you could get a bargain move, but get a guy who, not only comes with a great story as being a local hometown guy, but just showed me in the playoffs last year, he still had a ton of value that maybe was hidden during his years in Detroit. And the last one for me, it would be, a distant third for me on this list, but Antoine Roussell would be a guy I would check in on to see if you're trying to add a little bit of spice to the bottom of your lineup. Those guys, I think, do it in spades.
Yeah, for me, I know you touched on Dallas and Rick Bowness connections. I think Jason Dickinson could be a guy that fits that same mold. He was kind of used in that checking line role. He can play center, he can play the wing. I mean, obviously, he's not an overly offensive guy. He scored 9 goals once, but a hard guy to play against. And also Miles Wood from the New Jersey Devils is a guy that I think, coming off an injury-filled season, but I like his game when he's healthy. He had 17 goals the previous year. And then also Lawson Krause would be a guy that would be interesting to look at, pending unrestricted or a restricted free agent with the Arizona Coyotes.
All right. Okay, let's move on to a little bit of draft talk. Best person to do it with is the guy who's running the show for the Winnipeg Jets, who is either has a really good backdrop or he hopped on a plane and got straight out of here after the draft. Mark Hilliard, it's great to have you on the show. How are you doing?
That is a good backdrop, but that's a 20-minute walk from my house. So right there.
Are you serious?
Street. Yep.
Excellent.
Go there every morning when I'm home.
Attaboy. There we go. Okay. So let's get into it. I saw a lot of takes on the draft and how people think everyone did. I saw a take on yours. They said they like what you did. They said they thought you took a lot of big swings and risks. Couple days free from the draft. If you take a look at the work that you've done, does it still look as good as it did on the days of the draft?
Yeah, I think we're really happy with how it turned out. And I don't know, I would think it was the opposite of taking big swings and risks. I thought it was a pretty modest kind of plate appearances for us, but I thought we did well and what was available to us,
Mark, with Rutger McGroarty, I mean, what stood out in kind of the viewings, and also for people who maybe didn't see his interviews, like what stood out about his personality with the more that you talked about him, whether it was at the Combine or in some of the meetings with the Jets as well?
Yeah, well, you guys met him. You could see what type of personality is. Lights up the room with his smile, really infectious, really positive. Almost hard to believe how much of a good kid and leader he is when he comes into a room. Very professional, very well spoken. But 95% of what we like is on the ice, but he has a great personality and leadership and off ice qualities to go along with that.
2015, the edict came down. You guys needed to get faster and more skilled. And boy, oh boy, you guys, with that target in mind, went out and hit time and time and time again. I do know, I'm glad we're talking about Rutger because you talked about a need that he fills, right? This team is trying to get harder to play against, is trying to get to the dirty areas, get to the gritty goals. And that's the kind of stuff that Rutger provides. I'm wondering, Mark, I know it's always the idea is to take the best player available, but the lens through which you are scouting players, has it changed at all since that kind of 2015 era where everything was just like as speedy and as skilled as you could get?
Not really. That's the way it fell that year. We always try to put our list together the same way. Try to get the best possible players and the best assets available at the time. You're always comparing risk reward type in your conversations and in your draft list. You're trying to get the best possible prospects for your organization. And it just came down to Rutger was a guy we had high. He's got the great character and leadership and stuff, can play in those dirty areas of the ice, like you said. But also, this guy's a good hockey player. He's a 50-goal scorer. He does a lot of good things on the skill side and, has a high ceiling. And we just think it was a great all-around pick for us. He checks a lot of boxes.
Mark, it reminds me of when Adam Lowry, obviously different players, but when Adam Lowry was drafted, I remember he wasn't at the draft, but like the first thing he said out of his mouth, I got to work on my skating. I mean, when you have a guy come in and say, I'm working with Barb Underhill, when you hear when his buddies are going off to see their friends at the Christmas break and he's working on his power skating and he comes to you at the combine and said, this is my plan. What does that tell you about him in terms of what he wants to get accomplished long term?
Yeah, that's what you want as a plan, right? Like one of the first questions I ask the players, what type of player are you? If somebody hadn't seen you play, describe your style, your game to us. So we want to hear a player describe what we see on the ice. Then the next thing I'll say is, what do you need to work on? What do you want to get better at? He'll tell us. Hopefully that's what we see as the same thing. But then I want to know the plan. I just don't want to say, yeah, I'm working out all summer like they all say. Like, I want a plan, and how are you going to get better, and how are you going to go about it? And he had the plan, and it was well thought out and with the right people, and he has the work ethic to do it.
One thing that really stood out to me in that draft, Rutger McGroarty, you talked about it. We got to meet him, great guy, but when he got drafted, when the Winnipeg Jets called his name, he popped. This is a guy who is ecstatic to have you guys call his name. And then we go right down to the 7th round, and you feel free to grade me on how I'm pronouncing this, but Dominic DiVincentis, did I do that okay? DiVincentis?
That's pretty good. I mean, I was worried when I made the announcement, but I think I pulled it off okay. I think you did too.
Okay.
So I think that's it.
So it was the 7th round, and to me, there was no bigger pop in the 7th round than when he got his name called. There was that crew up to the right of the stage, if you're looking at the stage, and they went wild when he got called. And the one thing that I thought is, if I'm the Winnipeg Jets, and I hear these kind of reactions from these players who are getting called and the happiness they have in being called to be a Winnipeg Jet. I mean, for you, when you hear that, how much does it kind of reinforce the conversations that you've had with these players, the character that you see in them? How much does those reactions reinforce that you nailed it?
Yeah, well, you hope they have the same feelings a few years down the road, and like we love the reactions we heard. Like you couldn't be happier when a guy wants to be a Winnipeg Jet. He wants to embrace everything about the team and the city. We knew with DiVincentis in the 7th round there that a couple of North Bay players were taken before him. They went up and sat in the stands with him and another couple of teammates that hadn't been drafted yet. He also had another kid on his North Bay team that was drafted after him a few picks later. So, it was all the North Bay players and parents and friends and stuff that were stuck around with DiVincentis, hoping he would get drafted. We're pumping him up. We're, keeping him positive. And then they heard the name called. So it was a great reaction. We knew he was in the crowd because we have a list of the players that are there. We know what sections they're in and stuff, but we didn't know we'd get that great reaction as well also.
Yeah, what a roar.
That's great insight. Sorry. I just want to say that's great insight. Thank you for that.
That was a great roar too. Mark, I mean, Brad Lambert's an interesting character. I mean, some of the folks you expect him to play in the World Junior, and then maybe also, obviously, we know his skating is something that pops. I mean, what were your conversations like with him? I know you touched on it a little bit at the draft, but for me, I loved his answer about everyone saying, oh, well, he's dropped so much. He's like, well, I'm going to rise as quickly as I fell. I mean, I love that self-assuredness and the confidence. Is that something that stood out to you in maybe some of your dealings with him? But I also know you had some viewings where he really popped as a player as well, even though he had a tough year in Liga.
Right. So, I was at the World Junior from the start. Saw him play 2 games before it was shut down. As I told you before, I thought he was the best player in the tournament. It was a small sample size, but it was just the 2 games. And then I had under 20 viewings of 2 games at the end of the year at an event in Czech Republic, and he was quite good there as well. Played one of the games on wing, one of the games at center. He was good in both games, but his Liga season was not good on two different games, or two different teams, sorry. But, he takes ownership of that. We said, there's no way to hide that. He didn't have a great season. He wasn't in a good development situation. And, we told him, your season is what it was. It's over now. We're looking forward to the future. If that World Junior had played out, we wouldn't have got you at 30, I'm sure. So it is what it is. He fell a little bit in the standings, but we're ecstatic to get him at 30. We're hoping he has a great development year coming up, and we'll see what we have a year from now.
When I talked to my Finnish sources and asked what their take on him dropping was, they had said that, and it's funny you're talking about him taking ownership of his bad year, but they had thought the take in Finland is that he put himself into a little bit of a bad situation and the choices he made on how to develop and where to develop this year. Is that what you guys saw, and what can you explain to us about maybe what that situation would have cost him?
Well, I don't want to, that's kind of speaking for him and the choices he made a little bit, I guess. Like I said, it didn't look like a good development situation to me playing in Liga. But I mean, he did play in the league as a younger guy. Players want to stay home sometimes and play closer to home. Just all as I know, it didn't turn out very well. He's ready to turn the page. We're ready to turn the page. And, I hope to see him in the Western Hockey League next year. That's not ultimately the player will have to be on board with that. But I hope that's what happens, and we'll see what happens in the end.
And Mark, you expect him to play in the World Junior? I know you got a couple guys who are injured and won't be available with Chaz Lucius and probably Cole Perfetti, but would that be a good jumping off point for him getting ready for his first NHL camp?
For sure. I expect him to be there. I haven't heard anything to the contrary.
I'm interested in this. Kevin Cheveldayoff made a big point of kind of talking about the lack of draft picks over the last couple of years. Has that been frustrating for you when it's your job to refill the cupboards and you don't have as many opportunities to do it? What's it like as the head amateur scout who can't get as many cracks at doing his job?
Yeah, well, of course you'd like lots of draft picks, but I told Chevy at the end of the day when we traded some draft picks a few years ago and kind of went for it. I've been in the league over 30 years now and I've never won. So I want to win a championship as badly as anybody and win a Stanley Cup. I don't want to go down having done this for 40 years of my life and not won. So I was completely on board with trying to trade some picks and get better and make a run in the playoffs. But having said that, it was good this year to have a full 7 picks and restock the cupboards a little bit, able to draft some different types of players and so forth. And I think we had a good haul. So, I think it looks good for our future there with this draft.
Sure. One of those guys in the future, Elias Solomonson, I think he mentioned that he'll play 2 years over there in Skellefteå. But when he mentioned Adam Larsson, when I was looking at him, I'm like, oh man, I mean, I thought it was an interesting comparison, not having seen him play at all. But from talking to you, it sounds like he does have a little bit of that edge to his game as well. When you watched him, what stood out about his game and what will the benefits be for him to maybe spend an extra couple of years before he comes over to the North American game back home and playing in Sweden?
Right. He probably didn't have the offensive year he wanted to have, but it was still a pretty good year. I think he scored 11 goals on his under 20 team there. I think he got in 8 or 10 games in the SHL. I don't necessarily see him as a power play guy, but he's got the power play shot. He's got a bomb from the point, and I would think that's where most of those 11 goals were scored from. But he takes care of his own end first. He's a good-sized kid, really strong. He's a really good skater, one of the best skating defensemen in the draft. Closes on people quickly, takes time and space away quickly. He'll play physical and with an edge. And I think if there's some offense, more offense to come in his game, that's just a bonus. But I'm really excited about the pick and where we got him.
Was there a feeling within your organization that Daniel Zhilkin, were you surprised he was there when you went up to pick him?
Yeah, a little bit. We had him, like all the players, usually you have them higher than where you get them. Um, we had him in a good spot on our list. He's a good, strong kid, 6'1", around 200 pounds. He was also an impressive kid when we met him. You know, the story about coming over to Toronto and never leaving. He's also been with Gary Roberts, I think, since he's been 13 or 14 years old. He kind of had a plan along the same lines as McGroarty. He was, he was in charge of his plan and where he's been until this point and where he was going. And he certainly looked like a well put together, strong kid. And you could see he's put a lot of work in. So I think his season was a little inconsistent at times. He even played 3 games on defense for Guelph this year that I wasn't actually aware of until he told us at the Combine. But I think they were short with either sickness or COVID or whatever, and he played a few games. But we see a real good skating center iceman that's got skill, and I expect him to have a big year this coming year.
Ken, just let me say something to your point, Mark, about him well put together and the work he's put in. We talked with him and he turned around to walk away, and his shoulders were so broad, I described it like he had wings that came out. He turned around, you didn't see how big he was. Then his back was like just unbelievably wide. Definitely a put together kid. Sorry, Ken, go on.
And then how about
that's what I saw when McGroarty took off his jacket on stage at the draft. Yeah. It really popped there when he took the jacket off, put the jersey on.
Yeah. Creating the eclipse. Interesting with Garrett Brown. I mean, you mentioned that he was just, a kind of an undersized 5'9" defenseman at a Western League camp as a youngster, and then has this big growth spurt. What maybe stood out about what you saw from him in Sioux City of the USHL?
Yeah, so the 5'9" story I knew from our scout, Jeff Finley, whose son played in Spokane. And, a few years back, they were at the Spokane camp, and Jeff Finley said there was this little 5'8", 5'9" defenseman running all over the place with the puck, and a really skilled little guy. But now he's measured just under 6'3", and I think he's just scratching the surface. One of those kids that probably matured physically a little later. So he's just starting to grow into his body. His play at the start of the season, it took a little while till he was, kind of trusted by the coaches and played in all situations. I think that happened around Christmas time where they increased his ice time a lot. By the end of the year, he was a big part of the team and a top 4 player, won a championship. And he's going to go back to Sioux City to build on, what he started this year, get a good year under his belt in the USHL before going to a good program in Denver.
Yeah, you get a feeling with him that he's a player that is kind of like really started to shoot up and a little bit of a late bloomer, especially with the size and everything like that. I sat with his dad, Curtis, because his dad does TV and stuff with the San Jose Sharks. So I sat at the draft where the Sharks played, not the draft, the Cup final where they played the Penguins. And I had a long conversation with him. It got me thinking, like, I wonder him growing up in that area, what's it like developing in an area like that where hockey is still probably fairly new? Would that have anything to do with kind of the late rise that he was, in an area where maybe hockey wasn't as set up and he's getting to a place where he's getting a little more structured as he goes?
Maybe, but I think those U.S. players and all those kind of non-traditional markets are becoming so much more popular now. And you're getting players out of Florida and California and Texas and stuff like that. So I don't think they're really any secret anymore, but I think the level of their play is increasing, like in the Adam, Pee Wee, that kind of thing. They're just starting out, but their programs in Bantam and midgets and stuff, they're really improving a lot in the last few years. So they're pretty green until they get to those areas where they're drafted out of the USHL and CHL and stuff like that. So it's probably a reason why they're a little late developing.
Mark, we'll get you out of here on this one. We know it's the dinner hour out in Newfoundland. Just with the way this calendar, we talked so much about the NHL calendar and the junior calendar and the pro calendar. I mean, what does it mean to have the viewings starting in August with the U18 and the World Junior? I mean, what will that mean for next year's kind of development after you finally get a little bit of time to unplug here?
yeah, hopefully we're going to be back to a completely normal season. We'll have to see how that goes. Last year was still a little bit interrupted. We didn't have a World Junior tournament when it was canceled. We didn't have the February tournaments. We all know what's happened in Russia with the play there. So the Olympia starts on the 31st of July, actually, so we don't have much time to reload and get ready for that. But I look forward to a regular season anyways, and it'll start in a couple of weeks' time.
Mark, one last one before you go. Ken, we had a conversation with Kevin Bieksa, whose son, he's growing up in California. Kevin is trying to kind of establish hockey in that area. Not that it's not already established. I just wanted your opinion on this. Kevin told us, and make sure I'm right on this, Ken. Kevin told us that the East Coast is kind of known for bigger, grittier, tougher hockey. The Minnesota area is known for super skill, and he feels like California is kind of a good mix of both. Good blend of both. Does any of that sound like what you see when you scout?
I'm not sure about the California angle there, but I mean, the old story is they call Minnesota nice. So the players are skilled there. They're sometimes not the grittiest or whatever. You say you get the grittier, and the U.S. side get the grittier type players out of the Boston area than the Minnesota area. But hey, that's, maybe that's a wives' tale as well. You can find a tough player from Minnesota and a skilled player from Boston, but on the LA angle or the California angle, I'm not so sure yet.
That may be wishful thinking at this stage. We'll see how it turns out. We'll ask you in a couple of years. Mark, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. A lot of good stories in there. Love having the curtains pulled back, and you did a great job of that. Thank you so much, Mark.
Appreciate it, Mark.
Hey guys, thanks. Take care.
Talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right, let's just check and see. I think he's good to go here.
Yeah.
We're gonna bring in Elliot Friedman. Better late than never, Elliot. What do you think? You're just gonna take some? You're gonna take some time off after the draft? You don't get to rest, Elliot Friedman. There's no days off. How are you doing, my friend? How was the draft, and how was your last couple of days going?
It was good. I really enjoyed the draft. It was good to see everybody there for a change. It was really, really nice to see just all the people at a live draft for a change. Sorry, my son's playing with the hose. I'm worried I'm about to get soaked. It was good to see everyone at the draft. Even Ken. Sean, I can't say what Ken said, but he delivered the quote of the century at one of our dinners.
Yes, he did. And he also ordered that tomahawk steak that you guys made gluttons of yourself over. That was
good. I got to say, Ken with a good order, high quality.
Yeah.
We do what we can. We do what we can. Elliot, what kind of sense do you get from what the Jets could be doing here over the next couple of days with free agency around the corner?
I have to tell you, I haven't heard a lot about them, which is probably good on their part. The Jets like to be quiet. Cheveldayoff takes real pride in being quiet, and I think things around the Jets have been about a little louder than he would have liked over the last little while. I'm expecting Paul Stastny to go somewhere where he thinks they have a chance to win this year. That's what I heard. I don't necessarily think Stastny will be one of the first guys signed. I think he could be sort of like in the second group. And I'll watch at 11:01 your time on Wednesday. He'll be the first guy going. But I think he'll be in like the second group, and I think he'll go to a team that he thinks could win. But I'll be honest, I've not heard a ton about the Jets and free agent targets. I've heard more potential trade things and things like that.
I like the Avalanche or maybe the Panthers with the Paul Maurice reunion for Stastny when you talk about two contenders.
Yep, it makes a lot of sense. It makes an awful lot of sense, Ken. Absolutely.
Does the league think that Blake Wheeler is going to be traded?
Like which league? Are we talking about the NHL head offices?
Well, give me like around the league. Is there a sense that general managers are expecting that domino to fall?
Look, I think the conversations have been had. I think that people understand that Jets and Wheeler are working together on this about the possibility of it. I just don't think it's necessarily an easy thing to do. There's not a lot of money out there. There's very few teams that can take the contract on its own, and how comfortable are the Jets going to be about eating some of it? Probably not very comfortable. So I think it's a complicated thing to do.
And we know that the defense score is something that's going to be in flux again, Elliot, much like last year where there were the 2 trades in 24 hours. And Brendan Dillon's name has been out there the most. What sense do you get in terms of how the Jets are going to alleviate the logjam on the left side?
Well, I have heard Dillon's name out there a bit. I have heard there's interest in Dillon. I think the interesting thing is, like, I've just heard right now, if you're trying to move salary, it's really hard to do without paying something. Like, the one name I've heard a lot, and it's not on your team, is James Van Riemsdyk, right? And this is a guy who scored 24 goals last year. This is a guy, I think he's owed $5 million in cash this year, and $1 million of it's already been paid in the bonus. Like, it's not an onerous deal. And there are teams asking Philly, I believe, for like a first rounder to do it. So I think right now, if you're really trying to move money, it's a hard thing to do. And, we'll see. I think some teams got to figure out what the market is before they're deciding what they're going to do.
I had a GM tell me he was surprised there were so few moves at the draft, and then said that he expected, following the draft, in between the draft and unrestricted free agency, that it was really going to pick up. That clearly hasn't happened. I know there's still time, but are you surprised that there haven't been as many moves as maybe some would have expected?
Well, I think Chicago kind of took people by surprise what they decided to do. And I think a lot of us are wondering, like, someone sent me a tweet today, like Chicago's roster next year. It had like Reichel, Taves, Kane, Seth Jones, and like a whole bunch of person or someone and something like that. Like, I do think like there are some teams there that are like Buffalo still has to get to the floor. Buffalo still has to get to the floor. There's other goalies, other players teams who have to get to the floor. But I think they're going to make it hard on teams. I think they're really grinding teams, Sean. And I think some of these teams are looking at it and they're saying, we're not going to pay that price until we absolutely know we have to. Like, one of the things I think we're kind of waiting here right now is Gaudreau. And I think Calgary's sitting out there with a big offer. And I think there's some other teams waiting. But I think they want to know, do we have a shot at Gaudreau before we start clearing our rosters? So I think it's a big waiting game right now. I think these moves will eventually happen, but I think right now it's a bit of a waiting game.
Elliot, Sean and I were both mentioning Dylan Strome as a possibility for the Jets to...
Oh, we lost him.
Okay.
He comes back.
Well, we'll get back to one thing we should also bring up. I know we talked about it a little bit the other day. I mean, I'm very curious about the goaltending market and how things kind of transpire here in the next little while. I know we talked about Eric Comrie and his situation the other day, but what's your gut tell you, Sean, about Comrie, whether he's back? And if he's not back, do you think the Jets roll the dice with Mikhail Burden as the backup?
We talked about that. I mean, at this stage, I don't know. I could see them going and looking for cheap relief on the market. To me, there's a number that they have in mind that they feel like they need to hit. And again, if they've got that number that they need to hit, it's one of these situations where it would be nice to get some cost assurance with the Blake Wheeler thing. But I do think I always like it when we do this, right? Like, we have the conversation that we had about Blake Wheeler earlier in the show, and Elliot comes on, and basically what we said is exactly what he said. It's not an easy deal to do, right? So Elliot's back. We'll bring him back into the show. You had something you wanted to ask him, Ken. Go for it.
Sorry about that. I got a call I had to take, guys.
No worries. Quick one on Dylan Strome. We both wondered if he could be a fit for the Jets. What's your sense of what the interest level is going to be like with Dylan? He's an interesting player, right? He's not great defensively. He's not really physical, but he can produce offense, and he can help a second power play unit. And he's still a big and strong guy, even though he's not necessarily a physical player.
I think he's going to have a lot of interest. I think, like, I just heard that there's going to be a lot of teams contacting him because they feel that he showed a bit more last year. As you said, he's got flaws, but what player doesn't? But people look at his production. What's the hardest thing to do in this game? It's score. And he can either score or set them up. And, he's proven when given an opportunity with a guy like Patrick Kane, he can play with a pretty good player. So I think Dylan Strome's going to have a lot of opportunity.
I was talking again with some sources, and I was almost surprised to hear it, but a team that I thought was fairly cash-strapped was talking about waiting to prey on other teams that were cash-strapped. And it seems like I heard the line so many times about, the cap only going up $1 million and the trouble it's putting everybody into. Are we at the stage where money is going to force very good players into traditional markets that guys don't want to go to? And I say that knowing very well that Winnipeg is near the top of that list. UFA Day is boring as hell in Winnipeg. I have to cover it every year and say this is what they could use, and at the end of the day say they never got any of those things. Are we at the stage where the financial situation is going to force players that typically wouldn't have gone to Edmonton or Buffalo or Winnipeg into those markets?
I think, Sean, I think the biggest question is going to be, I don't think that's going to be the case about Edmonton. They're going to spend. But I think there's going to be some teams that have a lot of cap room. How much are they going to spend? Like Chicago has been a powerhouse. Are they going to spend? Is Buffalo really going to spend? Buffalo traded for Ben Bishop and they almost traded for Matt Murray because they wanted to hit the floor, right? I think there's going to be teams out there that don't spend, that simply say this is not our year. I think, Sean, I think there's some players out there who are really worried about getting squeezed, absolutely squeezed. I think the top guys are going to get paid, like Johnny Gaudreau is going to get paid. We saw that Fiala got paid. We saw that Forsberg got paid. But I think there's a lot of players really worried. And I think we're going to get a sense of how worried they are by, what this is going to look like by 6 p.m. on Wednesday.
Elliot, one guy who won't get squeezed, Andrew Kopp. Obviously, it sounds like there's going to be a ton of interest in Kopp's services. Maybe the Rangers may circle back again. And I think Nashville would be a team that would be on the radar. Anaheim, LA, maybe.
I think LA's out. I don't think LA can do it anymore. But I could be wrong about that. I think pre-Fiala, he was an option there, but I have a feeling he's going to be out of that.
Yeah, but what about Nashville? I mean, is Forsberg, does that take him out? Or?
No, I think Nashville still has some room, and I wouldn't be surprised. I think Merrick mentioned that on the radio today. I like that idea. I think Drury's keeping all of his options open for a second-line center in New York. But Nashville makes a lot of sense to me. I still think they've got potentially a move left in them.
It says we're stepping away from the Jets. I'm interested by this. So the Evander Kane situation, one, I wanted to know what you thought of the offer that was made to him. Two, I wanted to know what you think of Edmonton's comfort level to say, okay, well, Evander Kane looked better this year than he's looked in a long, long time. Are we at the stage now where players who need to resurrect their career or maybe make a few extra or a few less bucks and play with those guys to kind of, boost their status for their next contract? Where are you on the idea of what the Oilers offered Kane, and where are you on the idea of their comfort of just finding someone else to fill that role?
Well, it was about what I expected Edmonton to do. Maybe a little bit less. 4 times 4 was what I heard. Maybe a little bit less. But, I think, despite the fact that Kane had a great finish to last year, I think a lot of us wondered what the market would be. His confidence in saying no to that's an agent's job, to go out there and figure out what the market is. I'm really curious about this. The whole thing with the situation with San Jose, I think if he gets an offer that is much better than what he was owed by the Sharks, 3 times 7, I wonder if he just drops the grievance and says, I don't need to pursue that anymore.
Interesting. Elliot, I know we talked a lot during the coaching search. What was your take on how things ended up with the Jets ending up with Rick Bowness as the head guy? And secondly, how Rick kind of leaned into being the second choice and didn't let that bother him where other people may have been a little bit, had their nose out of joint, if you will.
Well, I was my wife's 4th choice, so things like that don't really bother me. I think that... I have to take this that I really think that in life, sometimes you're the person and sometimes you're not the person. And is your ego going to let you interfere with getting an opportunity? I think everybody in Winnipeg knew who the first choice was, right? Everybody. And if you're saying, I don't want one of these 32 jobs because I wasn't the first choice, Well, that says to me you've either got a lot of options, you're overly confident, or you're way too hard-headed. And, like I was surprised when it was Bowness because I thought he would be an assistant there, not a head guy. But the one thing I do know is this. He went into Dallas in a really difficult situation, and he stabilized it. And I think, this has not been an easy year in Winnipeg. This has been a really hard year. And I think they look at him as a guy who's stable, and he'll play a certain way, and he'll play with stability, and that's what they want. You know what you're getting. Guys,
Elliot,
I have to run.
Yep.
Okay?
Yeah,
I gotta run.
I was going to say you work too hard, and we all benefit from it. But we appreciate the time you took away from your family. Let's take any more of your time. Thank you so much.
All right, guys, take
Have
care.
a great week. Appreciate it. Thank
See
you.
later. Last thoughts, Ken.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be an interesting time around the corner. Our thanks both to Elliot and to Mark Hillier for joining us. Fantastic insight. I mean, that's what we're trying to do our best with getting grade A guests on our program, and love the engagement and can't wait for Wednesday. I know it could be an interesting time. I mean, sometimes it's a little quieter for us, but I still feel like there's a move or two coming around the corner here, and I think it'll be one involving a foundational piece here.
It is always quiet here. Like I said, if you want to go back to the biggest free agent pickups that we've had here, you're talking,
Foley Jokinen and Matthew Perreault and Steve Mason. Sure. Yes.
And Matthew Perreault was really an unknown when they picked him up. Like, that was a savvy pickup, but I mean, you're not I don't know that Matthew Perreault is turning down 10 offers to come to Winnipeg. I will say this, I'm not totally convinced about it, but if there's a year where something big could happen, this feels like it, just because the financial situation, to Elliot's point, players are kind of getting backed into a corner, and the money that they're looking for is not really out there. So I think we're in a situation where maybe there's players who are taking money from whoever is offering it, and that could be the Winnipeg Jets. Just wanted to give one last thank you to our sponsors, the Johnston Group and Cambridge Credit Union. If you appreciate the conversations that we are all having, the illegal curve boys, Winnipeg Sports Talk, and ourselves, just appreciate the businesses that are investing in that for us. That's the Johnston Group and Cambridge Credit Union. Thank you so much for that. And once again, I know when we've got guests on, we don't turn to the chat room as much, but we are constantly watching. I saw all the jokes about the Lockport Cowboys. They made me laugh. I hope you can see that. Thank you so much, everybody. We will see you when we do our post-free agency show on Free Agency Day. Thank you so much for joining us.